This week on Rent Wars, we're going to talk about the Eric Garner protests and some of the events and facts um, surrounding the failure to indict the officer who killed Eric Garner. Um, First of all, uh, in addition to the protests, um, the attacks on Mayor Bill de Blasio, we're going to talk a little bit about the Ferguson debate as well. What's going on over there, the violence, the looting. Uh, Basically, uh, we're going to talk about all these issues because they wrap together. I wasn't planning to do a show on this, but this week's protests, uh, it seems very important that people understand what is going on. First of all, most people are under the impression that a grand jury is somehow an investigative body. What a grand jury does is take what the prosecutor gives them, and theoretically, they're supposed to decide, is this enough to start the criminal process against some poor target of the prosecutors? So the idea is not that they determine whether you're guilty or innocent, but whether or not they have received enough information from the prosecutor. So what that means is that if they're not given all the information, they're not going to indict. That's the theory. In reality, grand jury is pretty much a big fat rubber stamp for the district attorney. Former Chief Judge of New York State, Saul Watzler, used to say you could indict a ham sandwich. In other words, the grand jury process is a big fat joke. Now, it wouldn't have to be a big joke if there was some sort of advocate against the prosecutor in the grand jury room. In addition, if the prosecutor doesn't like what a grand jury does, all he has to do is disband it and put a new one in place. So people tend to think grand jury is something better than a regular jury, but a regular jury, if they find you not guilty, theoretically at least, you're not supposed to ever face those charges again. A grand jury just says, at this time, we don't have enough to pursue more. So, for instance, you want to accuse someone of murder, charge them with murder. Uh, if well, what do you have? Oh, well, we just think he did it. Well, no, that's not good enough, not yet. So a grand jury is just saying not yet, and you could have a later grand jury said now the time is right, or even the same grand jury. Uh, so their decisions can be revisited by any other grand jury. So when you hear this, oh, the grand jury decided, and the prosecutor, wrings his hands and says, oh, the grand jury decided, you know what it really is. It's a cover up for the DA and his cop pals. So what they're really saying is, we don't want to pursue it, because if they really wanted to pursue it, of course they could. Now, on the other hand, the system is set up defectively. It's unethical. The DA relies on the cops. How can you expect the DA to turn on them uh, at the drop of a dime? It's very difficult. Of course, they can do things when the officers like dealing drugs with known drug dealers or something. But as far as these use of force cases, there's a conflict of interest. In every other area of law, if an attorney has an ongoing relationship with someone, or if they're a former client, or if there's someone that they've represented before, they are told attorney, get off the case. You can't be on the other side of the issue with people who you've represented. So we know that the DA's office is constantly representing these officers' interests. They're constantly taking the criminal charges, which are made by the officers, and presenting them to the grand jury, and then prepping the officers to overcome the defendant's defenses and defense attorney. Uh, why isn't that done in this situation? Well, they say because it's the government. The government's everywhere. Well, the problem is when the government is and members of the government, such as police officers, are the people with whom you have this interest, this conflict of interest. It's more important than ever to uphold the rules of ethics and separate, the DA from even having to worry about going after people he works with all the time and represents all the time. So it's actually an abomination that they're even able to do that or pretend to do that. So the problem is actually systemic. And it's not just an ethical problem, it's a separation of powers problem. Because when you have the judicial system mixing and intermingling with the executives, you have two arms of government working together instead of being checks and balances to each other. And it sounds good that they work together, but it isn't, because what happens is you get things like this where it's a mockery of justice, where someone can kill someone and get away with it. Now, if you or I sat on someone's chest as they were saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe," and let's say a group of us were sitting there and operating together, much as the officers did, all of us would be charged with some form of murder. We'd be charged with murder, manslaughter. There'd probably be a bunch of lesser charges included that the jury could pick from. That's not what happens when police are involved. It's as if the laws don't apply to them at all. They can kill. They can kill as a group. They can do all sorts of heinous things. So the question is, what systemically is happening here? What's happening is we've created a new class of nobility here in the United States. Now, the Constitution says you cannot do that. But we have two, actually. One is this sort of police class. They can go around killing people at will. And the other one is the lawyer class. And the lawyer class, incidentally, despite the fact that the Constitution says you cannot have titles of nobility, they specifically forbid anyone who's not a lawyer from using a title of nobility, and that's the ESQ that you see at the end of almost every lawyer's name on their card. ESQ stands for Esquire, which is the lowest level of aristocracy, nobility. These are people who are considered above us, the peasants, the peons, people who have no rights. So that's whether you're black or white. When you add the black or Latino disadvantaged minority element, suddenly you become the American untouchable. You become, in effect, you have rights less than the rights of a slave. The fact of the matter is that this situation has been in effect for a while, and despite the fact that there have been laws to change it, there's been public opinion trying to change it. We have a press the fourth estate that actually is little better than the old Soviet Union's Pravda for the most part. It just cheers on the corruption. But make no mistake, the officer's ability to kill this man while he's saying, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," to sit on his chest. They say it's the asphyxiation from the chokehold. It seems to me more that it's the inability of the man to breathe because there's someone sitting on his chest that's suffocating him. It's completely absurd that anyone would think they could do that and still walk around free amongst civilized human beings. But make no mistake, the reason the officers know that they don't have to care if someone's saying "I can't breathe," it goes much higher than them. You have to look higher. Now, you can say the Supreme Court, but that's true, but not really, because you don't find anything where the Supreme Court says knock yourself out, kill people like that. But if you look, they don't do enough to stop it. But if you look, there are people who do say go ahead, knock yourself out, kill people. There are racists high up in our judiciary. And, let's name one. The chief judge of the Second Circuit, Robert Katzman, is one such racist who doesn't care if you have rights. He's a person, even though you know that there's been Brown versus Board of Education, you know that Plessy v. Ferguson was overturned. This is a judge who's a chief judge who cheats people of their rights by gaming the assignment system and applying Dred Scott. Calling him a racist doesn't really do him justice. He's more of a Nazi. He doesn't have the power of the marching SS troops. But if he did, trust me, he'd be approving of them. But what he can do is encourage the police that we do have to abuse the power that they do have. And that's what he does by stripping away the rights. And he's just one, but he's a major one. So, you look at this Eric Garner situation, you have to say, why is it that they feel that in the 21st century, you can get away with this? We've got you recorded as the man saying, "I can't breathe." Well, it's because of Nazis like Robert Katzman, Chief Judge of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, let's talk a little bit about, these conservatives who are saying, look, this is ridiculous that a cop could choke someone. Conservatives, this isn't even just a liberal issue. Sitting on the man's chest as he's saying, "I can't breathe." What sort of insanity is that? What was the necessity? Was he going to sell an extra cigarette in front of you? We hear all these attacks because Bill de Blasio says that he felt his son Dante could be in danger of being killed by these police. And you know what? That's exactly why he won the black vote, because he clearly made it clear, this is my boy, and my boy fits with your children. My boy is indistinguishable from them. And this is why he won that vote of confidence. And they're attacking him, saying it's a slur. Well, it ain't a slur if people are dying left and right. It's just unreal that anyone would even think to question the mayor's ability to be concerned about his son's life. So, from the absurdity of people criticizing the mayor, saying, "Well, I'm worried my own child could be in danger," which is a valid concern. If Dante is walking down the street and some officers decide, hey, there's another one we can kill and we're above the law, well, that's a big concern. Now, the fact that it's the mayor's son, chances are there will be something the mayor can do, being that he's their boss. but he can only do it after the fact. And in that split second, they could kill his son. Now I want to discuss the protests, the energetic protests that took place on December 4th, 2014. Um, it was very, very interesting. When I participated in the Trayvon Martin protests that came up from Union Square, there was a different feel going on. There was more hostility from the drivers. This time, I was one of the drivers stuck in the traffic caused by the protesters. Um, of course, you're inconvenienced, but when you find out the reason for the traffic that you're stuck in, uh, you tend to feel a little bit better about it. At least, particularly if you uh, support the protest goals. What was so interesting is this protest actually on the West Side Highway. Um, the protesters started walking amongst the cars, and we'd been stuck there, and everyone was we jammed there, and people started honking. Well, I started honking first, and I actually opened up my window and put my hand out to high five these guys. They had these wonderful signs. Um, they were varied in race, sex, class. They were wearing just some dressed as Wall Street brokers, some dressed as hippies. They had a variety of ages, mostly young though. As the energy that requires is, and the honking I was doing was like beep beep beep. It was all I could think of to do to show some sort of support, and a lot of other drivers started joining in. So we're all honking. At first, the protesters thought we're honking at them, but then they realized we're honking in support, sort of in rhythm to their chanting, their protest chanting. And it was a wonderful thing to see. They were walking through the cars, and all of us had been inconvenienced. And, all of us you would think would be angry at them, and instead they're getting high fived, and people were giving each other support. The protesters are saying to the drivers, thanks, thanks for your support. And of course, many of the drivers are like, thank you for doing the marching. And that was a wonderful energy to see, and apparently happened in more than one place. It came through in the news reports, and that was amazing. I didn't, of course, I had my phone, but I didn't have an actual video camera with me, and even if I did, I was busy, honking. So, and trying to show support, and it was an amazing feeling, um, and to see that energy, and to see that people were replicating that all over the city, was amazing. That people care. This is bigger than just one guy. This is the idea, the arrogance, the contempt for life that these people have, the complete failure of our legal system. Really? There's no way that a man who just sits there, someone's going, I can't breathe, and sits on him till he dies. They don't even try to save him or check on him. There's no way he can get away with that, right? I mean, not in America. Well, guess what? He did. Or at least for now. And you have a black president, a black attorney general. What do you know? You'd think that with all of that, well, that at least would stop. But it shows you, these are just hollow puppets who don't actually represent the people. They're made to look like the people, but they don't actually represent the people that they're made to look like. It's all just a farce. One of the other things is that before we saw the protesters, we saw the police. And the police were out in force. You just saw like these giant, like prison buses. You saw all of these little interceptor sort of mobile boxes that ride around. They're like scooters. Um, and you see plainclothes officers in unmarked police cars, and boy, did it feel like a police state when you just saw rows and rows and rows of flashing sirens. Of course, you do need police at these events because, maybe a hundred nine 999 of the protesters are there protesting nonviolently and trying to, really committed and sincere, but maybe one knucklehead just wants to start some violence so in the chaos they can steal something. Um, but it's just such a show of force. But when you compare it to the Bloomberg years, they didn't apply the force with that sort of iron Russian Soviet era iron grip that Bloomberg used. Now, I just say we're running out of time, um, but I just wanted to discuss um, what was happening in Ferguson. It was interesting. I was talking to a gentleman. He's married to a Latina, and he's from overseas, Greece actually. Well, not Greece, Turkey, and near Greece. And he's saying, "Oh, well, they need to do things the way Martin Luther King did them." Well, not really. You see, the problem is you've killed off our leaders. The structures from which those leaders came from, leaders such as Martin Luther King, have been destroyed. I mean, neutralized, infiltrated by COINTELPRO. There's been racist selective enforcement of the laws. Everyone has been smeared or damaged in some way or another. And then you say, well, there's no leaders, so you're just going to ignore people. And then something like the killing in Ferguson, or the Garner case killing, murder. Well, that one's probably a killing more than a murder. And what happens is people say, well, enough's enough. I mean, if you could just go around killing us, then we might as well, just unleash and riot. Even when there's this over militarized police force riding around, treating us, for all intents and purposes, like we're in an occupied territory. When you disenfranchise the voters, see, voting is supposed to be the way that you relieve these tensions so things don't reach this pressure point. But they've cheated the system and they've tricked people again and again. And in a particular place like Ferguson, the police department's just an overseer police department. I mean, they make no bones about it. It's an all-white police department in an all-black town. So, here in New York, we've improved. You have some African American cops, but that doesn't actually necessarily mean that they're going to show you some respect either. And of course, Eric Adams did chime in on that. Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams, um, former, or I think current leader of 100 Black Men in Law Enforcement. He talks about that, and there are people, African American law enforcement officers, who relish the abuse of their power on people of African American descent, even here. But what happens when you see these people are supposed to be your bosses? This is a town, and they have no vote, no say, nothing. Not only do you have to, realize when Martin Luther King, during his time, you didn't actually have the vote. There were different things going on. It's sort of like, asking someone to follow the strategy of like if you're in a race and to use an old Ford Model T in a Formula 500 in an Indy 500 race. It's not going to work. You have to update the tactics. And you have to realize too, when Martin Luther King was doing nonviolent protests, you were in grave danger for doing the nonviolent protest. Nowadays, it's almost like they bring you tea and crumpets, um, unless you're doing nonviolent protests that's a little more active than they want, like walking around the streets or shouting. Um, you know, the Martin Luther saying Martin Luther King and nonviolence is missing the fact that he didn't say don't take action. He was taking action at great personal risk, and ultimately he was killed for the actions he took. He was murdered, assassinated, and twisting it to where they're saying, well, Martin Luther King would want you to be quiet and go home and suffer quietly, and they have done this. Um, and with the help of some notorious black leaders, to sort of turn his legacy into an acquiescence to the abuse. But on that note, I'm going to end. But if you really want to uphold Martin Luther King's legacy, you have to update it. He opened the door, you got to go through it. He made tools available to use, we've got to use them, and not just getting angry, uh, but understanding that there are reasons why. When you have in effect reinstated slavery, um, by making use of the 13th Amendment, which says, there shall be no slaves unless there's a conviction, and then convicting everybody for every damn thing under the sun and selectively doing it, so that it only applies to blacks and Latinos, and certain Latinos at that. So on that note, I will of course take up some of these issues in future shows. On that note, that is this week's Rent Wars. Thank you for watching.